Okay, well, it looks like we've got quite a few people on here. We had a great crowd register for this afternoon, and so I imagine that we will continue to have some other folks trickle in. But for those of you who have joined here in just the last couple of moments, I will take a second to introduce myself. My name is Paige Oxendine, and I'm the program coordinator at the E-Factory here in Springfield, Missouri. And we're so thankful for all of you taking the time out of your afternoon to join us for this session with Spencer Harris. Of course, we wish that we could all be together in the perch at the E-Factory like we would normally be for something like this. But in light of everything that's happening in the world, we hope that you and your loved ones are in fact staying home and staying inside as much as possible. And hopefully we can all get back to some sense of normalcy sooner rather than later. So I'm going to cover a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to Spencer. Again, all of the participants are muted upon entry, and so go ahead and keep yourself muted. That will allow us to hear Spencer really nicely and clearly. And if you find yourself coming off mute, you should have the option to go back and remute yourself. We will, if time allows, use the chat feature for some Q&A at the end of the session. And so if you find yourself thinking of questions while Spencer moves through his material, feel free to drop those into the chat box. And I mentioned we've got Spencer with us here today, who I imagine most of you know and know how awesome he is. Spencer is the Director of Operations at Mostly Serious and holds a PhD in Communication Studies. You may not know that he's also the co-host of a really fun podcast and a passionate board game enthusiast. So if you have questions about those, you can probably drop that into the Q&A as well. And what I'm going to do is pretend with all of us at home in our makeshift offices that we are giving Spencer a really warm welcome and a round of applause right now, like we would otherwise be doing. And I'm going to turn things over to him. So Spencer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate that. I appreciate your efforts. And before we jump into today's conversation, I just really want to take a minute and say thank you to Paige, Rachel Anderson, everybody working hard at the E-Factory, at the Management Development Institute, the SPDC, and then any of the other organizations in town, Biz 417, et cetera. Just the number of organizations like the E-Factory that are working hard to make sure that all of us who are trying to figure this out kind of at the same time have resources and access to experts. These are the kinds of things that matter a lot right now for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, business owners, employees, leaders. And so it's a pretty incredible service all of you are doing. So, I want to extend that round of applause to you and your team and your efforts as well. And to those of you who are a small business owner or leader or team member or someone just working in the community, know that this has been weird for everybody. And so we at Mostly Serious are thinking about you, and we too are trying really hard to figure out how to make this work. And we know it's a little bit of a struggle. And so you're in our thoughts. We're going to figure this out. And if you need anything after this, feel free to reach out to us if we can be of service or you want to learn any more about this information. As Paige mentioned, my name is Spencer Harris. I've got a PhD in Communication Studies that I got from the University of Kansas, rock chalk. Typically when I say that in front of live crowds, people boo or throw things at me. And so the fact that I'm on a webinar right now is actually quite pleasant because I can't tell how many of you hate KU. I'm the Director of Operations at Mostly Serious. I've been here 3.5 years now. I started January 1, 2017. And that's my email address. If you have any questions, you want to brainstorm stuff, you want to get some examples of stuff we're doing, or frankly, if you just want to talk about how weird all of this is, I'd love to talk. I'm interested in helping people figure these kinds of things out. And that's how I spent the bulk of my time, certainly over the last month to 5 weeks at Mostly Serious. And so today what I want to do is I want to share what we've been doing in terms of our thinking and our behaviors to navigate all of this. A little about us at Mostly Serious. So we're a team of 13, about to be 14. We work with some of the area's largest organizations. We do custom web development. We're a full service digital agency, brand, strategy, design, research, marketing, et cetera. We rely heavily on data and insights, and we've been building really wonderful things for nearly a decade now. This is kind of a new version of Mostly Serious, as I imagine it's kind of the new version of all of our organizations. And we've been really excited by some of the opportunities this time has afforded us. It's forced us to think creatively and innovatively, about why we do things and what we do. And maybe more importantly, it's forced us to think creatively and innovatively about who we are. One of the areas where we spend a lot of our time as an organization is thinking about our values, which are listed along the top there, and our principles, which are listed along the bottom. And I show these because I want you to understand that when I talk about what we've been doing during COVID-19, a lot of that is a reflection of the time that we've taken before this to figure out who we want to be, what is important to us, and where we want to come down on the side of right, wrong, truth, et cetera. And so those values listed along the top have been very important to us during this process. Obviously, our commitment to community matters more now than it has in the past, and we've been actively working with a variety of area organizations to figure out how we can be helpful to them in these moments. But some of our values have really been tested during this time. We're going to talk today about collaboration, for example, and how to make collaboration work effectively in this kind of environment. You know, grit has been a part of our philosophy for years, and frankly, we have had a lot of tough conversations with our team members about how exactly not normal all of this is, and how we have to refocus and reshape our understanding of what commitment to work looks like when people now have spouses, partners, children at home, and how do we navigate that or help them navigate that, because that's the priority, and still make work work when it needs to. Along the bottom there are some of our principles, and you'll see these things come out throughout today's discussion too. We use principles as kind of our decision-making criteria. So for example, you'll see kind of in the middle there in that blue square, we believe in doing things for reasons. This is something that we remind ourselves in decision-making moments. When we ask, should we go left or should we go right, we figure out what the best reason is and then make a justifiable argument for it. And you're going to hear that kind of language come up as we talk about the ways in which we've transformed our working environment and our working relationships over the last month in response to all of this. So this is who we are. And I would encourage you, if you're an organization or a team or a company that is taking time leading up to this, to really figure out who you are and really figure out who you want to be. Now is the time to evaluate and test those things and figure out how to activate them. And if you're a team that is still in flux on some of these items, you don't know totally yet what your values are, how you want to behave, or how you define the truth, now's a really good time to start talking about those things. Because what I'm going to suggest today is that part of this is about changing your behaviors, but part of being successful in these moments is also about changing how you approach and think about things. And so we'll talk through all of that. In fact, today we're going to talk to kind of two big areas, and then we'll have some takeaways. First, I'm going to share with you some of the key principles, again, not unlike those things we just looked at, that we immediately sat down as a leadership team and then as an organization decided to kind of ground in our philosophy during this time. We really sat down at the beginning of all this and said, okay, so what is really important to us now? And how do we make that come to life in specific actions? So we'll also spend a little time talking about the kinds of processes, practices, and behaviors that we've implemented at Mostly Serious in order to make this a more smooth transition. And then we'll identify some takeaways. So if there are some key things that you could walk away with right now, what would you walk away with? And time permitting, I'd love to answer any questions. So let's talk about those principles. You know, in these moments, it's not just about how do we make a meeting that was a face-to-face meeting, a virtual meeting. It's also about why did we have that meeting in the first place? What's the purpose of a lot of the things we're doing as an organization? And as a leader or a manager or even a team member, how should I reflect on and change my philosophy when we're in a totally different working environment and frankly, a totally different social environment? And so we sat down immediately following our remote move and just started to have conversations about how did we want to be during COVID-19 and in this remote setting. So let me share with you kind of the 4 key principles we've been working under. And a lot of our specific actions are driven by these kind of philosophical approaches to different work environments and different sociocultural environments. So the first principle, and I think this is generally true, but maybe more true now, that we've really been trying to drive home to our leadership team and to others as we've been talking with other organizations around the region. Transparency and vulnerability are a leader's most effective tools right now. And I might extend that and say that they are an organization's most effective tools right now. You know, all of this is just a bunch of big unknowns. When is this going to end? When are we going back to our old work environment? When will I find toilet paper? We don't know things right now. And as a leader and as an organization or a team, your job is not to add to ambiguity. Your job is to diminish ambiguity. And I would encourage you not to take the easy out here and just to act like everything is business as usual and everything's just going to be okay. Don't worry about it. The reality is people can sense false positivity. We have a nose for BS. And telling your team that everything is okay, everything is normal, nothing has changed, and we're going to come out of this fine, when that may not in fact be true, it is not your best move right now. Rather, what I would suggest is to be very honest with people. One of the first things we told our team within the scope of reasonability was, look, we did not have a pandemic response plan mapped into our operational tools. We honestly don't know what a lot of this looks like, and we don't know when it will end and what the net effect will be. What we do know is that we're committed to figuring it out. We're committed to communicating frequently and as often as possible with our team about what we're doing, about what's happening, and frankly, about what is working and not working. I imagine many of you have probably experienced dips in revenue. Some of your customers may not be able to go into your stores right now. Some of you who work in a B2B setting may be experiencing the revenue loss of your partner's revenue loss. These things are natural and expected, I think, in a moment of a global pandemic. And the reality is hiding that stuff from your team and acting like it's not bothering you or affecting them is not a good way to build trust as a leader or an organization. You don't have to open the books and show everybody everything, but you should let them know that there is some ambiguity here. You don't know where we're all going necessarily, but these are the things that we are doing in an attempt to diminish some of that ambiguity. The other thing I would say is it does you a lot of good as a leader or a team member to show vulnerability, because vulnerability gets reciprocated. And in moments like this, when it's okay to not be okay, and many of your team members aren't just struggling with work stuff, but life stuff, because this is just different. It's not normal. When your team members are struggling with those things, it can be very uncomfortable for them to raise a hand, to throw a flag, to say, I'm not doing okay. And the more they see transparency and honesty at a leadership level or at a team level, I think the more comfortable people feel sharing with each other. And those are the kinds of things that build strong bonds and commitment in times like these, and you'll come out with a stronger team for having done that. A brief aside, some years ago, Google attempted to identify the elements of the most effective teams. They developed this large internal project they called Project Aristotle. And the goal was to test any available demographic, psychographic features that they could map, and then say, what are the ideal elements of the perfect team? And after months, years of data compilations and studies, what they landed on, demographic and psychographic factors, didn't matter all that much. What mattered in terms of effective teams was a sense of psychological safety, or the belief that people felt like they could share with others in moments of crisis or moments of need. And those are the things that build strong commitment and build stronger teams in the long run. So use this opportunity as a team member, as a leader, as a manager, to work on creating the conditions under which it becomes okay for people to understand. We don't necessarily have the clearest path, but we're okay talking about what we're doing. The second major principle that we wanted to implement at Mostly Serious, as soon as all of this kind of changed, is a real understanding of the difference in digital communication platforms and what that means in terms of our general interactions. Digital communication platforms, Slack, Zoom, Google Hangouts, are not the same as face-to-face interactions. And as such, you need different rules for those things. You know, routinely, people use nonverbal cues to evaluate the meaning and honesty of what we're saying. In fact, more often than not, people rate nonverbal cues as a more accurate assessment of someone's trustworthiness. And nonverbal cues are really easy to pick up on when we are in our social environments at work, having face-to-face interactions. You know, the bulk of communication which happens at work is in fact organic communication, the informal stuff, not just in meetings, but in between meetings. In the morning when people come into the office and you say hi and talk about what you watched last night. Spoiler, it was Tiger King. The things that happen after meetings when clients are off the phone and now you're kind of talking about how the meeting went, what you're taking away from it, and now you're on to talking about something else. The organic stuff is the stuff where we build relationships and commitment with one another, and our in-office settings are great for organic things. Alternatively, our digital platforms just are not good for organic communication. Unless you leave a Slack room open all day, or even a Zoom room open all day for people just to jump on the camera and chat whenever they'd like, and even then you'll find people won't take you up on that. There are not as many opportunities for organic communication to occur. It's fundamentally different to walk by someone's desk and ask how they're doing, because you're already on your way somewhere else. It becomes a natural part of your behavior or movement. That's a lot different than typing a Slack message to someone to ask the same question when you're already doing a million other things and trying to figure out your life right now. So we have to think critically about how digital communication platforms are reshaping the kinds of organic and informal communication that we have every day that is really important to our teams and our team chemistry. The third major principle we've been trying to implement and focus on here is not to get stuck on what we were doing, but instead to really critically evaluate why we were doing things in the first place. So for example, a lot of what we do organizationally, these structures, these routines, these rituals, the culture stuff, the workflow stuff, a lot of these feel like muscle memory, right? I mean, they're just organizational habits. I get up in the morning, I shower, I drive to work. I've driven to work so many times, I don't even realize I'm driving to work some days. I get in the office, I make coffee, I grab a cup of coffee, I sit down and I start typing. And then my day's over. And somewhere in there, I did all of the organizational behavior, habitual routine things that I'm used to. A lot of that stuff just isn't the same anymore. And so the question isn't, how do I redo those things? Because attempting to carbon copy the rituals, the routines, your traditional practices in a non-traditional setting is really a recipe for disaster. Instead of figuring out how to do all of the things we used to do, instead focus on what you were doing and why you were doing those things, and then figure out how this new environment, marked by digital platforms and video calls, how this new environment can be used to supplement those things. And if some of those conversations, routines, habits, and behaviors need to persist in a remote setting. Many of them may not. In fact, I've been surprised at Mostly Serious. We are a team that relies heavily on collaboration. I mentioned that in our discussion of core values, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes some collaborative tools we are using in this setting. But we have really had to ask ourselves, given the difficulties, the challenges of collaborating effectively on a remote setting, do we have to have as many of the collaborative conversations as we were having in the past to be maximally effective? And if not, how do we efficiently use the tools available to us and the time that we have to still end up in a good place? So if you haven't thought about the stuff you were doing and why you were doing it before you've transitioned to a remote environment and now you're dealing with a fundamentally different work setting, take a few minutes and ask yourself, but what are we trying to achieve here? And is the current remote version of that getting us to the same endpoint? And if it's not, figure out if it's necessary and then determine a better solution. Last key principle then, last key element of this is, one of the things I would suggest to you, don't feel the need to take this all on your shoulders. You probably have a team of people around you, and this would be a great time, if you haven't already identified some ad hoc or even some persistent teams to help you figure some of these things out. Now would be a great time to tag in some of your team members. We, for example, have 4 built-in teams that kind of take care of the non-project work around Mostly Serious. And I've been tagging in my fun team, or what we call the fun committee, quite a bit to help us interrogate some of the things that we've been doing in the past and figure out, A, the value around those things, and B, how we might do those things differently moving forward. Tagging in team members here who may not be involved in those conversations day to day can, A, give them another point of engagement with the organization when engagement with the organization can be more difficult because of our remote environments. And B, tagging in those additional team members might yield valuable insight from people who aren't necessarily always in those conversations about what really is the value of doing some of the stuff that you've been doing. Okay, last principle, and then we'll get to some specific behaviors, specific actions that we've been implementing. I would tell you that in a time like this, the organizational stuff in between work just matters more now. And what do I mean by the stuff in between work? Well, I mean the stuff that really builds team chemistry, the stuff that really builds team character and commitment to the organization. The conversations about what you've watched on Netflix, the in-office competitions, the rivalries between sports teams. These are all of the little cultural elements that add up to a fabric of an organization that makes you more effective. And the reality is, These things happen during team lunches and coffee breaks and happy hours, and even some of those team building events that probably you or some of your team members found annoying in the past. Those things are all important. And just because we're in a different setting now doesn't mean those things are less important, nor does it mean that it's a time to abandon those things. In fact, I would suggest that now is a time to find more ways to do that stuff, because it's harder to keep people connected and communicating in a virtual environment that does not prioritize or easily facilitate organic and informal communication. And we've talked about how significant that is. So we have to find ways to connect people, and we have to find ways to get people thinking about stuff just beyond the difficulty of projects or specific work. So we're going to talk about how we've been doing that at Mostly Serious. So as an overview, here are kind of the key principles we've been working under as a team. And again, we've organized these and used these as kind of guiding philosophies when we're making decisions about what kinds of behaviors, processes, and actions we can continue to implement and refine as we really thrive or try to thrive in this remote environment. Transparency and vulnerability are absolutely crucial now. Do not assume that you can carbon copy your meeting structure and your communication pattern in a digital environment. Focus on why you were doing things and evaluate the importance and goals of those things before you just try to keep doing the same things over and over again. And finally, now is a time to figure out how to do more of the stuff in between work, because we have to actively keep people communicating and engaged in environments that are frankly just less engaging. All right, so what kinds of specific actions can you take? As leaders, how can we build some processes? How can we intentionally organize some activity or event? And as team members, how can we maximize our day-to-day interactions to make sure we're being effective during this process? Well, I'm going to talk about specific actions related to 3 organizational practices. So let's talk about some specific actions you can take regarding communication, some specific actions you can take to check in on one another, because building relationships, maintaining relationships, and being a partner to your team members right now is one of the most important and effective things a leader can do in a time like this. And then finally, how do we continue to do some of the stuff in between work that matters when we're not all in a room together? So let's talk about some specific things you can do day to day for that. Okay, so let's talk about communication a little bit. How do I change or modify and certainly maximize my communication while I'm working in a remote setting, no longer in that face-to-face opportunity? First, I would say you should think about implementing a process by where you greet or introduce yourself to the team every morning in your shared communication channels. I don't know why, but my first day at Mostly Serious in 2017, when people walked in the door, I just started yelling good morning at them. And I don't mean kind of like, hey, how are you? I mean like yelling good morning at people. It's become annoying, I think, for everyone in my office. But I've done it for 3.5 years now, and it's my way of starting the day and letting people know that I'm happy they're there. And we're just going to keep going. This is part of our routine. I've not stopped that since we moved to a remote setting. In fact, I'll show you in a minute what it looks like. But if you're using Slack or Teams or any of your remote communication channels, this is an opportunity for you to greet your team in the morning and welcome them to the day. You've got Zoom available to you, or you're probably using some other video conferencing software. If you want, posting a short video in a shared communication channel, welcoming everyone to the day, reminding them about the purpose of the day or that you're here to support them, can be a really effective way of starting people's day off right and letting them know that you, as a team member, a manager, or a leader, are there to be supportive during this time. Because remember, being a partner is absolutely critical right now. And we do this every Monday and every Friday in our team meetings, which we're doing remotely over Zoom. We encourage people to share what they're most excited about for the week or what their big win was from the week. And what this does in terms of communication is that in a time of uncertainty, in a time when things are a little bit more difficult, and certainly some of the stuff happening outside of work is much more pressing and influential day to day than it might have been in the past, reminding people that there's still some good to focus on in your day-to-day project work is a really nice positive psychology way of maintaining some morale in a time when morale is challenged. So day-to-day, I want you to think about, how do I interact with and intentionally greet other people and welcome them to this opportunity? This, for example, is our in the office Slack bar. And so, as I told you, I've been yelling good morning at people for 3.5 years now. I take it as my primary job responsibility. And that's not changed. I post good morning in our Slack channels every morning around 7 a.m. And then you'll notice by way of the emoji responses, other people let me know that they've seen it or that they're also saying good morning. The 4 there is Sarah Jenkins' way of indicating that this was week 4 of working from home. And it was a reminder that, look, we're doing this and we're going to figure it out. You could also tell at some point I got a little stir crazy, and so rather than just saying good morning, I've kind of started to vary my good mornings. A few weeks ago, I put good morning, and then on Monday, I decided to call out every individual member of my team because I was up and I wanted everyone to say hi, and it's good for people to get engagement. And frankly, I've been in my home for a month, and so I needed to do something different too. But this is a low effort, low input way to remind people how much you care about them, that you're thinking about them, that individually they matter to you, and that you're there and present as an organizational member and ready to talk with them. Okay, so say good morning. Use those digital communication platforms to greet people and welcome them to their day. The next thing I would say is that video is very important, even if you're like me and you absolutely hate watching yourself. So at the end of our Monday morning meetings and Friday morning meetings, everyone at the table stands up and we all high-five each other at the same time to our left and our right. Why? No idea. And I certainly know that as new people come into Mostly Serious and see this ritual for the first time, it must look like we are an absolute cult. Don't know where it started, don't know where it came from, but we started doing it some years ago and it just stuck. Well, look, we're not allowed to high-five each other right now. In fact, many of us, all of us, are in different settings and so we can't. But at the end of every Monday and Friday morning meeting, we all high-five each other as a way to remind us, look, we're in different places, but we're not doing a different thing here. We're still a team. We still have our rituals. So use video. We're social beings, and we're conditioned to seeing each other in our workspaces. The face-to-face work environment is a social environment full of organic communication and nonverbal physical cues. Video is a way of enhancing our opportunities to still get some of that interaction and satisfy some of those social needs that have become a part of our everyday physical interaction. Also for us, video has frankly been a way to introduce some fun into this environment. It's easy to get bored. It's certainly easy to get a little despondent about the lack of interactivity with others. So we've been using video a lot to make each other laugh. Here, for example, is a Monday morning meeting, I think from this week. And I just want to take a second to call out what our team members spent time on before a 9 a.m. meeting. So in the top left corner, you've got Miranda Provance, our director of engineering. We, of course, like the rest of the world, have been focused on Tiger King, so she put a tiger in the background. At which point, Jared Johnson, president and founder of the company, located just below Miranda, used the SnapCam feature. You can download a Snapchat feature to add to Zoom, to turn himself into a potato, nay, a Tiger King potato. I'm just below Jared there. I've inserted myself into Bayside High, and as a member of the Saved by the Bell cast. Just below me is Sarah Jenkins, who's working from Pee-wee's Playhouse. Jessica Spencer, our creative director, in the middle column there, is working from Monica and Rachel's apartment from Friends. And on the far right, the third one down, Emily Coulter-Dunn, one of our fantastic account managers, just over her shoulder, you'll see a cat napping in a hammock. And that cat has become the topic of much conversation, as has the cat hammock around Mostly Serious. I say all of this to let you know that these little moments are points of inflection to reify our culture, to talk about things that matter to us, like Tiger King or Friends or Saved by the Bell, to share things that we're watching or thinking about, to make each other laugh and connect in traditional ways in non-traditional settings. This is especially true in the virtual happy hours that we've been scheduling. So last Friday, from 3:30 to 5:30, we scheduled a Zoom happy hour, and a number of the members of our team hopped on. We talked about Netflix, we talked about things we're doing, we talked about plans for the weekend, we talked about wins for the week. Jess is drinking from the Cheers bar. I'm having a drink from Merlot's from True Blood. Miranda is in the bar from Altered Carbon, and Sarah is drinking at Tom's Bistro in Parks and Recreation. These have been opportunities for us to inject fun into an otherwise not great setting sometimes, to connect with each other, to do some things which are normal and dear to our heart. And at Mostly Serious, we love a happy hour. And to connect at a time when connection is more difficult and therefore needs to be more intentional. It's not just in the fun stuff though, right? Like early morning meetings or happy hours, but also in your standard meetings with your team and certainly with your clients, your other stakeholders, Those meetings just require more structure and intentionality now. The real weird trick to a remote meeting is like the conversational lull. As a communication guy, like nothing can make me more uncomfortable than a moment where no one knows who's supposed to be talking, so everyone just sits quietly until 4 people start saying things to break the silence. And that's even more likely to occur in a remote meeting because we don't have a lot of the physical cues that we have in face-to-face settings to let us know, I'm done talking, now you can start talking, or to signal to each other, hey, why don't you jump in here and give this a shot? So the first thing I would suggest is, if you've not been using agendas for your meetings in the past, I would certainly recommend using agendas now, even for small internal meetings that identify what we're going to discuss, the time limits on those discussions, so people have some sense of when the conversation is transitioning or what they need to come prepared to discuss, and who owns that content. This is a really nice way of signaling to others, hey, I have stopped talking about what I'm talking about, and now we're going to talk about that next thing, and according to the agenda, you own that next thing, which is a really nice way of diminishing the risk that other people start talking over one another, and you get a really nice handoff into the next portion of the conversation. And as a leader, what I would suggest, if you are managing those meetings or running those meetings, you should think a little bit differently about your role in this setting. Typically, we think of leaders as participants, adding some expertise, some perspective. In these moments, I think that leaders should really think about facilitating conversations. So don't just share your thoughts or opinions or expertise, but instead go the extra mile to move the conversation forward and tag people in as necessary to diminish the risk of those conversational lulls or some of that ambiguity and uncertainty around who's to be talking. So during our meetings, for example, I might say something like, well, that's a really interesting idea. Jess, would you mind jumping in and talking about that? And after Jess talks for a few minutes and gives a really well thought out opinion, I might say, Jess, I love that idea. Miranda, what do you think now? And what I'm doing there is I'm naturally moving the conversation forward, but because the remote meeting environment can get so uncomfortable and so stale, really what I'm trying to do is avoid some of the lulls that can really damage a meeting and a conversational rhythm. So think differently about your meetings, provide agendas in advance with much clarity around who owns what information, in what order that information will be discussed, and how much time is allotted for that discussion. And then make sure someone is appointed a meeting facilitator to move us through the topic of discussion. One other thing I might say here, practice with your technology. There's a really good rule in public speaking. You're free to use all the technology you want, and you should assume all of it will fail. Practice with Zoom before presentations. Get comfortable with your slides and their animation. If you're using a remote microphone, if you're using Bluetooth speakers or wireless headphones, make sure you've practiced with those things before you get on a call, not only to ensure that they work, but also so you know how to troubleshoot those problems if and when they arise in the course of conversation. One way that you can enhance the quality of your meetings is you can identify some remote collaboration tools that still make it possible for you and your team to work well together. So one of our kind of like guiding actions at Mostly Serious is the need for whiteboards. In fact, if you ever come to our office, we have a conference room full of just walls of whiteboards, and then 2 more working spaces with walls of whiteboards. Because we like to collaborate a lot. We love to get in front of a board with a big problem, and we like to just start drawing things and writing stuff and erasing things until we find a good solution. And while we aren't in the same room and we don't have whiteboards available to us in the traditional sense, there are collaborative tools that can supplement some of that need. So for example, one of the tools we've been using is Zoom's whiteboard feature. So when you click on share screen in Zoom, one of the options available to you is to select a whiteboard function. And it'll bring up a whiteboard that looks just like this. And I've even mapped a little bit of a whiteboard for you here. You can add text, you can draw, you can add images. It would suggest, based on the graph on the right side of the whiteboard, that you'll be the richest person ever soon. And the first step was listening to this webinar. All of that brought to you by Zoom Whiteboard. Is it a perfect tool? No. Is it a little clunky to use? Yes. That doesn't mean don't use it. It means practice with your technology before you take it to a client meeting or an internal meeting so you are quick, effective, and easy in using that technology and that it doesn't hinder you as you're trying to work. If you're not crazy about Zoom or not using a lot of the Zoom features, there are other features available to you. We use Notion, for example, for collaborative document building. And Notion has been a nice platform for us as it allows any number of people to see documents and edit documents collaboratively on the fly, which means we can all be adding information at the same time, and we can add text, we can add images, we can add links to other things, we can add tables. Notion is a fairly robust document collaboration tool. We've been using that to supplement some of our out-of-office collaboration needs. And then finally, Google Docs is one of the best and easiest ways, especially if you're on the Google Suite, just to be able to share information and edit information easily. So we need to think critically about how we can change our communication and how we can make our communication work in the current environment after we've critically evaluated what we need to accomplish, okay? So we gotta think critically about our remote collaboration tools. We have to intentionally communicate because our organic communication opportunities are so diminished in an environment like this. And we've got to think critically about how we organize and facilitate our conversations so that we can move conversations along and technology doesn't become a barrier, it becomes a facilitator to great collaboration and meetings. Communication isn't the only thing we should be thinking about as leaders and team members right now. We should also really be thinking critically about how we can check in on and participate in the wellness of others. Remember, one of the big opportunities for us here is to be a partner. And how can we partner with members of our team and check in on them regularly to ensure people are doing okay in a not okay time? I would really suggest that you schedule intentional face-to-face check-ins with your team. That goes if you're a leader, a manager, or just another team member. And I don't just mean a phone call, I don't just mean a few minutes over Slack, I mean video conversations where you see each other, even for 5 minutes, just to check in. We really believe and have acted under the assumption that it may be hard for people to admit they're struggling. But we don't want digital communication platforms and our lack of informal organic communication to be the reason we don't understand that or we don't respond and behave accordingly as an organization. Because our remote environments are not built on organic communication, we as leaders, team members, managers, et cetera, are in a unique position to structure our days around, to build into our schedules opportunities to check in on others, and just to have, frankly, human conversations about how people are doing. Let me give you a snapshot of what that schedule looks like at Mostly Serious. We have some form of intentional check-in built with all members of the team or some members of the team every day of the week. So on Monday mornings, we have a direction meeting that is our full team. You've seen images of that meeting. It's a video meeting. We cover what we're focused on for the week, what we're most excited about. We talk about projects in our status meeting, and we see the whole team for about 30 minutes to start the day. The leadership team then gets together for about another 30 minutes just to talk about high-level issues, which means that by 10 o'clock on Monday morning, everyone on our team has interacted with and seen everyone else, and we've had some more focused conversations with members of the team about what's working and not working and where their challenges are for the week. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have optional Zoom lunches that are team-wide. So everyone on the team from 11:30 to 1 can microwave whatever frozen meal they're likely on for the 37th day. They can bring it to a Zoom lunch, sit down, and we can just not talk about work stuff for a while. And is it the same thing as sitting in the same room or walking to a restaurant nearby to eat? No. But it's an opportunity to interact, an opportunity to not talk about work stuff, and an opportunity to be together as a team. It absolutely is. And so we typically see over half the team or so attend those optional Zoom lunches, either on Tuesdays or Thursdays. On Wednesday mornings and afternoons, our individual directors, so our leadership team, is checking in with their teams. I check in with the leadership team. Our creative director, Jessica Spencer, checks in with her team on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Miranda Provance, our director of engineering, checks in with her team on Wednesdays or Thursdays. And then Lucy Howell, our director of client strategy, checks in with her team typically Tuesday to Thursday, which means that by Thursday, we've now had 10 to 15 minute and sometimes 30-minute video conversations with every member of our team before we get to Friday, where again, the whole team gets back together in the morning. We see each other for 10 minutes for a stand-up. How'd the week go? What were your big wins? Anybody need anything right now? Then we've got a leadership team lunch and an optional full team Zoom happy hour. I'm not talking about big stuff here. I know that in the course of COVID-19, your regular work hasn't necessarily stopped and you've still got 40+ hour weeks in front of you. But if you don't feel as a leader or a team member right now that at least some portion of your primary responsibility should also be to make sure that the health and wellness of your team members is not at the core of your area of focus, I would encourage you just to reevaluate that for just a moment. We aren't talking about hour-long, 2-hour-long, 3-hour-long meetings. I'm talking about 15-minute calls with a standard set of questions that can really move the needle for your team. Let others know that you're thinking about them and that you care about them during all this, and that you want to be a resource or a partner here. Ask questions like, how are you doing? Tell me about some things that are going really well, or tell me about some things that you're struggling with. You know, one of the things we've been asking people in our Friday morning meetings, not just to talk about a win for the week, which everyone has to do, we're also asking our team members on Friday morning meetings in front of the whole team in a video call on Zoom, what's one thing you did this week for your mental health or wellness? And people are sharing, you know, well, I did yoga, or I went for a run, or I used this exercise video. And we're getting suggestions from one another, but we're also making very prevalent and organizational the conversation around mental health and wellness, which is incredibly important in this moment. And now is not the time to shy away from difficult conversations about the health and well-being of your organization. It's a time to shine a light on them. And so we have made that an intentional part of our communication in our Friday morning meetings and during our check-ins with our individual team members that everyone encounters all week. Finally, the last thing I like to ask before I thank people for the time and for the contribution to the team this week is, what do you need? Anything. And, you know, sometimes people just need to vent. They just need to talk about how they're feeling. They need to talk about how not normal this is. Sometimes people need resources. You know, they need access to something. They need to get a plugin. I mean, we work with a lot of technical tools, and sometimes people need technical tools. But what's important is that people know that you as a leader, a manager, or a team member are there to help them in those moments. And even if you can't provide the kind of support that they need, I bet that you've got an opportunity to figure out how they could get that support or help, or at least you were there to let them know that you care about those things. And again, being a partner is one of your primary goals during all of this. So we know that we need to check in. We know that we need to be intentional in seeing each other's faces and asking other people how they're doing. We know that we need to change our communication patterns, that we need to adjust what we've been doing to reflect our remote settings. The last thing we got to figure out how to do is to continue to satisfy, you know, the stuff in between work, the traditional team building things that are core to your team's chemistry, commitment, purpose, etc. So the stuff in between, you could still find ways to repurpose and reproduce your everyday team building opportunities via your digital platforms. You know, Zoom or other video conferencing software can facilitate group meetings. All of the happy hours, lunches, the breakfasts that we do with our team, the stand-up meetings, the Friday mornings and the Monday mornings. These are all ripe for video conferencing opportunities. And this is not a reason not to do them because you're not in the same room. It's a reason to do them over a digital communication channel. But it's not just the everyday team building stuff, right? It's also the stuff beyond that. The team competitions, the conversations about what you're watching, the nitty-gritty things that come up in the course of conversation over coffee. We have really been focused on using our digital communication platforms for non-traditional team building activities. So first and foremost, we're using a Slack channel. You could just as easily use Teams channels, I imagine, to discuss shows and video games and music and books that we're consuming during this. And that's all stuff we would talk about anyways. Now we're just talking about it in a different setting. But it still allows us to share what we've liked, what was funny, what was interesting, or what we're focused on over the next couple of days. And again, it's a conversation about stuff outside of work that builds chemistry and character for team members. One of the things a lot of organizational literature will tell you, people are infinitely more likely to be committed to an organization if they feel like they have at least one friend at work. And these are the kinds of conversations that develop friendships. It's not just the day-to-day stuff, though. I would tell you that at Mostly Serious, we're very, very focused on competition. We play a lot of in-office bingo. And for reasons unknown, we also refer to bingo as bingort or bingerino. These things happen, people. Bingo is a day-to-day or weekly activity. Once a year, we also have kind of like a much larger competitive setting that we call the Bowl-Olympics, because it started as bowling. Get it? We took Olympics and bowl. You get it. We did not see these digital platforms as a reason to ignore or abandon these activities. In fact, we saw these digital platforms as a way to step up competition at Mostly Serious, which we take terribly seriously, okay? So let's talk about how we're still doing some of the non-traditional team building stuff over digital communication platforms. As I mentioned, bingo, bingort, bingerino is very important at Mostly Serious. Here is a winning board from Jessica Spencer from some months ago. You'll notice that that is a very large bingo board and that we required 2 lines to win. Almost everything on that bingo board or bingort board or bingerino board is stuff that happens day to day in our office or with our clients. We did not take this lightly from the get-go. Here is an entire Bingerino channel on Slack where we argue about and vote on the rules for bingo at Mostly Serious. This rule in particular was how people could officially challenge a called bingo square. We did come to an agreement on this. And then when someone wins, we also take bingo very seriously. Here's one of our very talented designers, Jessica Gottstein. She won the Bingort Championship. Yes, we have our own trophy for that we pass around the office and display with much pride when we win, because we take these things seriously and because bingo squares are an opportunity for us to capture nuances and particularities and fun things about our team members and then talk about them, make them kind of these open discussions, laugh about them a little bit, and build the kind of chemistry and communication that is required of effective teams. Not being in the office doesn't mean that we can't play bingo with each other. And so one of the things we've done is we've moved this to an online platform. Our Director of Client Strategy, Molly Riddle-Nunn, has taken upon herself to use this OSRIC platform, osric.com. She's built Zoom-based bingo squares and or digitally remote-based bingo squares for everyone in the office. And then every time a bingo game ends, she sends out specific boards to each participant on the team, and we're filling them out digitally. When you win, you just post in the channel that you've won, you showcase your board, bingo bango, you'll get a trophy once we get back in the office. You'll notice that a lot of the squares now are related to our remote environment. So a successful client presentation over Zoom. Someone forgets to stop sharing their screen. Someone says, oh, go ahead on Zoom. Because again, conversational lulls and the uncomfortability of remote communication. You'll also notice Tiger King is discussed, trash television is discussed. Look, we are who we are, right? That doesn't change even in the middle of a pandemic. We have found ways to repurpose the stuff in between work that really builds teams in an online platform, and it doesn't take that much time, and it is well worth the effort. If you're interested in figuring out how to use this bingo card generator for your team, feel free to email me after this, and I'll put you in touch with Molly, who I'm sure would be happy to share kind of easy and efficient ways to build your own bingo cards. But remember, it's not just bingo we take seriously. We compete all the time about everything. And at the core of that has been the Bowl-Olympics, these once a summer, large-scale, day-long competitive activities where we define teams, we set aside rewards, and we spend a day just working with one another. In 2018, we launched the first Bowl-Olympics. It was at Andy B's. Bowling was worth 25 points per game for each team. There were 2 other pages of activities that you could participate in the arcade and then laser tag to score points. And then the winners were given awards. In 2019, we changed our setting and I significantly stepped up my design prowess, thank you. And we moved to Best of Luck Beer Hall. We instead there focused on the tabletop games they make available, the stand-up arcades and pinball machines, and then the bocce and the bags on their kind of lawn court. The Bowl-Olympics has been invaluable for us. We split into teams years ago. Teams came up with identities and logos and flags and slogans, and we used those things. People made t-shirts the first year just to taunt one another about Bowl-Olympics things. All of this stuff matters. And the easy solution here as a leader or team member is to say, well, we can't go to Best of Luck, so we can't participate in the Bowl-Olympics. But the right solution here is to think about how you can do this stuff differently in a remote setting. So we tagged in our fun committee, and about 10 days ago started planning the Bowl-Olympics in virtual space. This goes back to that think about why you're doing things, not what you were doing, okay? What we were doing was going to Best of Luck or Andy B's, and we can't do that right now. But why were we doing that? What were the goals of that event? To engage our team in social activities, especially now while we're physically distant, and to take our minds off a global pandemic, which honestly is a pretty good organizational goal right now. So we've been working with our fun committee under that activities heading to identify the types of activities we could participate in and score each other on in remote settings. So doing a 30-second dance and posting the video, Chubby Bunny on Zoom, playing remote pub trivia, Jackbox games, which are online games that can facilitate a lot of players at once and then kind of does some built-in scoring for you. All of these are ways that we're attempting to keep the stuff in between work together and thriving while we're not in the physically same location. And these are the things that you should be thinking critically about as a leader, a manager, and a team member. How do we not only keep this stuff alive, but help this stuff thrive in moments where disconnection and despondence is much easier? We've talked about an absolute ton today. I hope you've been able to kind of take some things that you could implement immediately for your team. As a reminder of what we've covered kind of high level, this is a time really to activate your culture, not to ignore it. You don't push pause on the stuff in between work because you're not at work anymore. You push play on it. And it's time for us to figure out how we can really engage members of our team and connectivity to make the best of these moments. Physical proximity is important, but it is not the exclusive reason your people work well together. There are a variety of other reasons, and those haven't been diminished, and your digital tools are certainly capable of enhancing them. Don't just think about changing what you're doing, think about why you were doing it and what of your digital toolbox that's available to you now supplements or enhances those goals, that motivation, and that purpose in the best way possible. Digital tools are or can be your friend. Remember, they're great for communication. They can be good for interaction and the flow of information. But you've got to be intentional. You have to create some structure, and you have to identify people who can facilitate those kinds of conversations. And remember, practice, practice, practice with your technology. Finally, and I cannot say this enough, and I'll say it for the rest of my life, your primary goal right now is to be a good team member and to be a good partner in this process. And that means meeting people where they are, asking what they need, caring about them, because this is a tough time for everybody, and then helping them build some organizational structure and rhythm that makes them most effective and makes your organization better. So those are some of the things we're doing at Mostly Serious. I hope this was helpful. Thank you to all of you for sitting through this. I know webinars can be a little bit weird, but I cannot thank the eFactory enough for facilitating this conversation and for giving us the chance to share the stuff that we're doing. We're very proud of who we are, and we were really enthused to get this opportunity. So Paige, I don't know if there were questions or something you wanted to tag in on. We've got a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Spencer. I've got the chat box open here. I don't think we've had any questions dropped in yet, so I'll leave that open for just another moment. We do have a question here about whether or not the slides can be emailed. So Spencer, if you're willing to share that
Absolutely.
deck with me, we can certainly send that out to everyone. We're also recording, and so we'll be sharing that with everyone as well. I'm going to take just a moment here to share my screen. Let me see here, Spencer. I'm going to reclaim being the host. So yes, okay. So what you'll see over here, hopefully now on my screen, first, Spencer did a great job of mentioning that today's program is actually co-sponsored and co-presented across all of our eFactory programs, including the Missouri Small Business Development Center and also the Management Development Institute. Part of that means that there is a survey that we would love for you to fill out. Actually, if you take your cell phone and hold it over that QR code, it will open the evaluation on your phone. Just a couple of really quick questions. And your participation in that is a huge help to us in terms of our reporting that we do. So we would really appreciate it if you took a moment to do that. Secondly, we have another webinar coming up on April 28th focused on digital content and branding, led by Ashley McCrary, who's a successful blogger and content creator. And if you're interested in registering for that, you can find that on our eFactory homepage. And I would also share that we have a new series of programming that we're rolling out really in response to this pandemic that Spencer has touched upon, and the fact that everyone is really in just a very different situation than we found ourselves in, you know, a month or 6 weeks ago. And so if you are missing meeting people essentially and interacting with those outside of your circle and maybe outside of your immediate work team, we have a new series called Ask Me Anything, where different community members have made themselves available. You can go online. This actually starts next week, and there are sessions every day. You can book a time to chat with all sorts of different people, primarily local, but also some folks from the Kansas City area. Lots of different backgrounds and areas of expertise. And so just a great chance to take 30 minutes and connect with someone new during your day. And information about that is also on our homepage. And so find all of that there. And we would love to have you be part of both of those activities. Okay, I'm not seeing any other, oh, we've got a comment about Rock Chalk. I'm seeing that.
There we go, there we go.
Go Bears, right? We're in Springfield.
Absolutely, go Bears too.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I imagine we've probably got people who are having to get off here and get onto their next thing. But again, Spencer, thank you so much. You know, Spencer really was willing to do this on a pretty quick turnaround, as you all can imagine. And he and the rest of the Mostly Serious team do an incredible job. And so we're so thankful to have them here in our community and everything they're doing. Okay. Well, with that, I'll let everyone go. Spencer, thank you again.
Thanks, Paige. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.